Hello everyone, Colin Canet here, back for WoodWorkWeb. Today we're finally going to put our router table that we built from scratch, we're actually going to put it to use today. I made a little bit of a modification. On the last video, you'll notice that I talked about this switch after I'd already installed the other switch, the power bar with the switch in it, which worked fine, but you know what, this one had it wasn't being used for anything, it had such a nice thick cord on it, which is what you need for an extended length of power so that you don't overheat your router. Why not install it? So I did. I put it on there and it's all ready to go. It's a little bit more difficult plugging and unplugging the router, but you know, it's a lot more convenient to use. So we're going to go with that today, and the first thing I want to talk about is the fence and the fence system. So on our router table, we're going to be using, this is about a 1.5 inch or 1 3/4 inch piece of wood. The only thing it is jointed on one side. In fact, it's jointed on two sides, so it's flat here and flat here. And all we're going to do is clamp it on either side, and that's going to be enough, in fact more than enough, to hold what wood we push through this little router and to give us very accurate results. Now, the reason I'm using this and not something else, there's no reason why I couldn't use a 3/4 inch board, and there's some advantages to doing that. As you see, when I do my first test here, I actually have to drill a little bit of a hole here for the router bearing or the router bit bearing, which typically you wouldn't have to do in a 3/4 inch board. So why am I using this? I'm only using this because it was convenient. It happened to be right about the right length, and I'm only going to be using it. I may end up replacing it. I will end up replacing it because it will eventually get chewed up, and you'll see when we start using it to conform to different bits how over time you're going to want to replace this fence. And any piece of wood that's at least 3/4 inch and flat is going to work perfectly for you. We don't need a high fence. Like a lot of the commercial fences are like this. Honestly, I cannot remember the last time I used a wood on end to go through a router. I don't know if I've ever done that. All of the wood that we run through a router is flat to the table, or I shouldn't say all of it, but almost all of it is flat to the table, which is why we want a nice big working surface here, which we talked about when we built this table. In a moment, I'm going to be installing this little OG bit we're going to do a quick test on. But what I need to do right now is, because it has a bearing on it, and a lot of these bits have, I need to make sure that this bearing is not going to bind up on my fence anywhere. So what I'm doing is, from here, just eyeballing a center line. That's all I need to do. Then from the bottom of the bearing to the top, or from the bottom of the bit to the top of where the bearing might be touching, I'm just going to make a little notch. So that's the minimum, and the top is the maximum. And all I'm going to do is just drill a hole right there. And I need to make sure that I drill it deep enough so that when it gets in there, that it'll be isolated. And the way I do that is by checking to make sure that when the bearing goes into that slot, that it will actually, if you put a board over top there, it would actually cover over top of that. Okay, so we're unplugged. Now let's seat that bearing in there, seat that bit in there. What we need to do now is we're going to loosen one end, and we're actually just going to pull it in, and it'll bite into this wood here, and the bearing will run free. And I'm going to run a little bit past so the bearing will be able to isolate the bearing. So you can just watch and see what we do here. So the first thing we want to do is check to make sure everything's clear. Got our safety glasses and our hearing protection on. So you can see how the cut has been made, and it's an exact match to the bit that we have in here. So to set this bit up now so that I can run some wood through, I need to isolate this bearing, and all I need to do is loosen up on this end. Actually, doesn't matter, one side or the other, and just move that so that that bearing is just touching. What I like to do is move it back and then do it so the bearing just touches. And that's it right there. Fasten that down on both sides, and we're ready to run some wood. Well, that isn't anything terribly outstanding, isn't anything difficult to do. And the beauty that I like about these fences compared to the split fences, you never have to adjust these. These are always, because most of the things you're doing, you're just running straight across. You don't have to be setting up fences to make sure the two sides are balanced, because a lot of people don't do that, and you can end up with other problems as well. So this worked out well, but let's put it through its paces now, and let's see what it can really do. Let's make some doors. So the first thing we want to do is just move our fence back a little bit so it's going to clear the bits that we're going to put in. Make sure we're unplugged. Okay, now we need to make sure that we can isolate that bearing. I have my wood ready for our door, and I've just marked with blue tape on top, because sometimes when you're moving these around you might get them flipped up, and I don't want, we can't have that happening because there's a way these go through. Now if any of you watched any of my router videos before, you'll know that I use these push blocks, and I just trimmed this one up, and I'm just checking to make sure it's absolutely square, and it is. So we're ready to push those two pieces of wood through. So what I'm looking at here is I want there, you can see there's just a little piece of wood sticking up there. I need to readjust that bit just a little bit because I want it to flare on both sides, and that's when I know that that bit is going to be right in the center of where this tongue is. Okay, let's run our grooves now. Well, let's get all our pieces for our little test door here. These together. Now what I'm looking at mostly is how tight our fits are in here. And you can see that there's a nice tight fit. That's really what, there's a little bit of leveling here that we'll need to do, but you touch that with a sander and that'll go away. But that's just how easy it is to make your own deluxe homemade router table. Well, this concludes our video series on making your own router table. We made the legs and the top, we put on the accessories, and then we finally, this last one, we just did the setting up the fence and making a door. So it's really a pretty simple project to do, and you can make yourself a good quality router table, and you don't need anything fancy. You don't need a split fence, although you can purchase them, you know, aftermarket versions, but you know, a piece of board up there works just as good as anything. You may want to set up your own dust collection things. There's all sorts of different things that you can do to customize your router table. This one here, we did the flip top lift. My own router table, I have a mechanical lift that you have to crank up and down to get the router bit to go up and down, and it's okay, but I wanted to try something different. If we don't try these things once in a while, we never know what they're like. So I had an opportunity to try this out, and you know what? I really like it. It works really well. It's nice to get, you know, without crawling around on your hands and knees. It's nice to be able to get all of this, you know, everything that you need to look at in the router. You access to changing the bits, changing the speeds, and all the adjustments. You can do that when it's in the upward position. So pretty happy with the way that worked out for us. Anyway, don't forget, subscribe if you haven't already. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and oh, don't forget to connect with me on Google Plus as well. I'm Colin Canet for WoodWorkWeb. Thanks for watching.